Welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House in New York, and to this Q&A with the director and lead actor, Tom Dolby and Lena Olin, from the film The Artist's Wife, now screening at Scandinavia House's virtual cinema, and as well as throughout the nation. The Artist's Wife premiered at the Hamptons International Film Festival in 2019, and is screened in the Palm Springs and Mill Valley film festivals, and won the jury prize for independent feature at the Sonora Film Festival. Tom Dolby is a filmmaker, writer, and producer. He is a screenwriter. His screenwriting and directorial debut, The Last Weekend with star Patricia Clarkson, was screened in 2007 by IFC, Sundance Selects. And Tom is the founder and principal of Water End Productions. Lena Olin is a Swedish-American actress best known for her roles of The Unbearable Lightness of Being, The Enemies, A Love Story, Chocolat, and The Reader. She has been nominated for several acting awards, including a Global Globe for Unbearable Lightness of Being and the Academy Award for Enemies, A Love Story. I would also like to thank Strand Releasing for helping making this screening and conversation possible. So I would like to start off, I always like to start off at the beginning. So this is a question for you, Tom. How did this project come about, and where did the idea for telling this story originate from?
It was really a few different ideas that came together. I had always wanted to do something about the idea of the other person in a creative relationship, in this case, the wife, because I had seen in so many creative partnerships how there's often one person who has to put their career on hold, or at least slow it down, and it is almost always historically the woman. And I thought that was just an interesting dynamic to explore. And then around the time when I was coming up with all that, my father was diagnosed with dementia, and I saw this sort of coming on and how my mother was dealing with it. And so I had this idea of this brilliant artist who was diagnosed with dementia, and then how his wife deals with that. And so it's this idea of, when a tragedy comes into your life, how can you use it as an opportunity and maybe even reinvent yourself creatively.
And with The Artist's Wife, why did you choose The Artist's Wife? There's been so many stories throughout histories of the wife supporting major figures. I'm forgetting the names right now. Jackson Pollock's wife, etc. Was that also an inspiration for you?
Yeah, it absolutely was. I mean, what I noticed with those stories, though, it was never the story. The story was never about the woman. It was always about Jackson Pollock, or it was about Alfred Hitchcock when his wife supported him so much. And so I was more interested in the other side of the story that we hadn't seen before.
And Lena, what drew you to the role of Claire? And did you have both Lena and Bruce, the great Bruce Dern, in mind when you were casting this film?
I mean, these things sort of always come together in this sort of like alchemy. You go out to an actor and you imagine them in the role, and then you think, well, who do I pair them with? And you don't know. You're taking this big risk. And I remember Lena told me in one of our first phone conversations, she said, sometimes with chemistry, you get lucky, and you don't have to manufacture it. It just comes naturally. And I think we were very lucky here that it did. But I'm so interested to hear what Lena was drawn to.
When I first read the script, I was actually in Sweden, in Stockholm, doing stage work at the National in Stockholm. And I stayed in our house in the archipelago, and you get there by boat. So I was sitting on the boat reading this story about this couple and their struggle. And I was so touched by something I think a lot of women in particular can relate to, that we lead a life and we live on, and there are things about ourselves that we kind of leave behind because we love, because we need to take care of someone else, because life asks of us things. So we kind of forget parts of ourselves. And then it's almost like we think if you think of yourself 15 years ago and you look at a picture and you're like, my gosh, I'm so different. I look so different. We don't realize that it's sort of things within ourselves are worn down by life. And then something like this, which is obviously a tragedy, a catastrophe, happens, and it forces her to reconnect with sides of herself that I think even she thought were lost, or she didn't even think of, that are so vital of who she is.
Mm.
And I think there was something so moving and so relatable in that. And that was my, and I love the fact that and I think a lot about the title now, the artist's wife. It's not the artist, it's the wife. And what Tom was saying, the person next to you, that so rarely is the one who the story evolves around. And I loved that.
Yeah. And then I was curious about, were you inspired by the Me Too movement at all? I mean, the Bruce Dern character isn't the most progressive, forward-thinking artist out there. He's a little bit misogynistic. Did that sort of inspire you to put the concentration on the film onto the strong, silent woman behind the scenes?
It's funny because people have said very early on the script. I mean, I'd been working on this story for something like 10 years, and then I was working with some wonderful collaborators, co-writers who developed it and really brought it to life. And it was funny, I had a conversation with Nicole Brending once, and we were talking about feminism, and I said, am I a feminist? She goes, oh, Tom, you're absolutely a feminist. You wouldn't write a script like this if you weren't a feminist. I was, okay, good. I felt like I needed the approval. But no, but that has nothing, I think being interested in those things, it predates Me Too. What is interesting is that all that was happening when we were shooting, or had just sort of happened and was continuing to happen. And we were shooting that classroom scene with Bruce, and Bruce came up to me and he said, I'm not sure we're allowed to say these words, And I said, Bruce, we're making a movie. We can say any words we want. And he kind of just had this big grin and said, okay. But I think it's a great example of how, these behavior that is disturbing or in a classroom or offensive and really would not be acceptable today is you still see perhaps in an older generation like his.
Right. I noticed some Marimekko designs scattered throughout the film, and I'm wondering if you brought in any of Lena's Swedish Nordic background into the filmmaking. Was there any other Swedish elements to the film that you put in?
Yeah, definitely. What struck me is in watching some of her films and also just other films with foreign-born actors, I always think it's so strange when films don't acknowledge any sort of background and somebody is just sort of generically European and has this accent, because it's interesting, Lena, with your accent, like, I don't know if I would be able to place it immediately. You could be German, you could be French. Like, it's hard to say exactly. And so, but I like things to be specific. It's like, this character is from Sweden. She is Scandinavian. And so I thought, let's acknowledge that, bring that into the production design, into the music. And we recorded Swedish Christmas songs. We couldn't find any that we could license, so we actually had to record our own, have our own made. We got a little consulting from Lena on that, which ones to do. I love Marimekko. I have a 1/8 Finnish and 1/8 Swedish myself on my father's side, so I've always loved Marimekko. So I was like, of course she has to have Marimekko. And then the other little thing is that she has a big jar of Swedish fish in the kitchen. So that's not authentically Swedish, I think, no. But it's a little inside joke.
Right.
I think what was fun, and Tom has such a huge interest in design and such a, his taste is so great, and you're very drawn to the Swedish Scandinavian design, which is very appealing and attractive. And that was so fun when we discovered that we were both designer freaks, that we love the look of things. And when we were lucky enough to use Tom's own house when we shot in the Hamptons as sort of a makeup house, or like a holding house. And it's the most, I was like, okay, I'm not leaving at all. It's just so, he's such a gorgeous designer himself. And I think that, and since Scandinavian design is very specific and
Right.
beautiful, I think you were drawn to that. But speaking of Me Too, I think it's one thing with the whole feminism and the Me Too that's been so important, but also I think that the idea that you cannot do, and I think this was the first time on this shoot where I heard someone say, that guy made a remark that made this extra feel uncomfortable, I think. And, you know, and he was really told that that cannot happen from everyone around. That's not okay. And I think that was the first time I saw people around stepping up and stopping things that before you would go like, oh, not so cool, but I don't know, let's keep moving. And also, but I think it doesn't stop with that. To keep moving forward is also where I think somebody asked me during the interviews this morning about how did you feel about a man directing a film about a female character, and I was almost like, it never struck me because you are so, Tom has such a huge interest in women, and especially women my age, or you are so fascinated by, passionate about, and I think it was like we did it together, and I never had like, oh, only a guy would say something like that, or only, you know, you were so, we were, because I think that's the next step, to take interest in women as the protagonist, as the person, as the, so I think that's how we move forward. It's not enough just like, okay, I'm not going to get any rude comments or somebody's going to touch me inappropriately. We need to put women as in the forefront of stories and storytelling, and not only a 20-year-old. And they need to be the protagonist too, obviously, but I think that's the next step. And I think that it's so amazing with, you know, we need scripts where the woman is the character. And I think that's very, I love that about you, Tom.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I think so much of it is just comes down to sensitivity when you're talking about behavior on set, and sensitivity. And then in terms of scripts, it's also just a sensitivity to fully fleshed out characters. I have a joke with my colleagues about how that some scripts will describe female characters, and it'll be like, so-and-so, you know, beautiful yet quietly intelligent is like the standard thing. And it's like, that's so generic, and so kind of like, why do her looks come first in terms of the description of her, you know? So I think we're turning a corner as people are more aware of this, you know?
Oh, I'm glad. And Lena, you have worked with some of the most famous directors, Ingrid Bergman, Milos Forman, Sidney Lumet. And I was wondering what was the best advice you ever received from one of those directors? And were you able to pass on any of that advice onto younger directors like Tom?
I think two of my first, you know, I've been very lucky, and I've worked with, like you just said, it's such a blessing to work with amazing directors, because it's amazing. But when I started out, I worked with Bergman, who you mentioned, and I think that he taught me that it's a very practical, you need to learn your craft. You need to go about it and understand it from the inside, and you need to be equipped, and you need to use your craft every single second. It's not, and I think he was so practical and magical, but the practicality of it all was so important for me as a ground to stand on when I kept going. And then I think something that another great Swedish director had the privilege to work with, Bo Widerberg, who made some amazing films. And he once said to me, when we did a lot of TV films together, and he once said to me, oh, that was amazing, don't do it again. And I think that was a great advice, that you should never try to repeat something that you fell in love with, and you should just keep moving. Even if you do like 100 takes, never repeat what you just did. But I never had any advice for Tom. Tom is such a great listener, and you know, that's a big part of being a good director. You set it up in a perfect way, and then I think you should just open your arms and open your heart as you sit by the monitor and just take it in the right way. And you feel when you have that presence or that sort of embrace of the director, it's palpable for the actor, and gives you courage and gives you, it's crucial.
Thank you. And so, Tom, the sort of your processes is you just sort of set up the scene, you set the stage, and you turn it over to the experts here in front of us, right? Or
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember hearing an interview with the director Nicole Holofcener, who I absolutely love, and someone said, what's your your secret or your technique? And she just said, I let the actors do their thing and I try to get out of the way. And that's kind of the way I see it. It's like when you're on set, it's such a circus and there's so much going on. And the thing that always to me was this great irony is you spent all this time with like costumes and makeup and the lighting and getting the, every piece of furniture is placed just right. And then you finally get to the acting, and that's like the shortest amount of the whole day, which is crazy. And so I was always pushing, it was like, we need as much time to do this as possible. I want to give my actors as much space to work. But I think you set up a safe sort of scenario and a safe space where they can work, and then you let them do their thing, and it's sort of like little, giant oven mitts. It's like if they're kind of going way off the path, you say, a little nudge, a little over here, maybe think about this or whatever. But you never want to tell an actor, oh, please do it this way, right. Because that's just deadly. Like Lena said, that's like trying to just recreate something, and then that's not acting. That's sort of mimicry. Right. I think just to have that safe space and then let the actors do their thing.
This question is for you, Tom. You're also an author, and I was wondering, how do you decide how to tell your story, what medium to use to tell the story? I felt like this film was also very literary, had a very literary element to it, so I thought I could be reading a book as well. So I was wondering why this was made into a film versus a novel. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. It actually did start out initially. The initial conception of it was as a novel, and I never wrote. I mean, I just sketched out some ideas, but it did seem sort of novelistic. It's true, and yeah, I think I'm just drawn to stories of that nature. It is a very intimate, personal type story for Claire, and so I think that would certainly work in a novel form as well.
And this is my last question, since this is from Scandinavia House, and for Lena. I was wondering if you had much contact with the Swedish film community, and would you ever go back to make a film in Sweden?
Yes, totally. I would go back in a heartbeat. And in fact, we're going to do, hopefully, a Swedish American international film in the spring about Hilma af Klint, a Swedish painter who had such a huge success at the Guggenheim, but led such a rough, hard life and had such a struggle. And we're hoping to start shooting in March in Sweden. If we can shoot it there, that would be great, but it's very expensive to shoot in Sweden. So we might be around in Europe, but also in Sweden. And I do, but I don't follow everything. I just finished something with Thomas Alfredsson, which is a broad comedy, Jönssonligan, which was so much fun to make. And I think it's going to open pretty soon, actually. I think I just got like a link so I could see it. And so yes, and yes. Okay. I wish, I feel very, I love Swedish filmmaking, and I love so many people who are doing it, and yes is the answer. I started speaking with a very heavy Swedish accent. I love Swedish filmmaking.
Well, that's great. We would love to see those films as well when they
Okay.
come out. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Oh, I just also, well, I always wanted to include as well, since we are living in such strange and odd times, how has the coronavirus and the quarantine sort of affected you artistically, and what is the positive things that are coming out of it? To leave this on a hopeful and positive note.
I think for any creative person, this has been, we're lucky because we can, as my husband has been working on the script, and I can take part of that process, and since I'm in it, we can discuss and we can move forward with the script. So that has been very lucky. And I think also it has, if you're lucky enough not to be sick or worried about somebody you love dearly who's very sick, I think that it's given us time to reflect a lot. And I think it sort of brought to the surface things that we, with the busy life, we have been able to just rush that to the side. And now we have to face ourselves and face the people around us. So I think it's created a lot of reflecting and hopefully made us more mindful. I'm hoping that's the effect.
Hopefully. And Tom?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, honestly. I think Lena just said everything I was thinking. So I agree.
Well, wonderful. And on that note, I would like to thank you again for taking part. Again, the film is screening virtually at scandinaviahouse.org and throughout the US too. So please do check it out. It's a wonderful film. Yes, so, and thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.